The winter of 1878 came early to the Nebraska Territory, bringing with it a bone-chilling wind that cut through even the thickest wool coats. The small frontier town of Cedar Ridge sat exposed on the prairie, its weathered wooden buildings huddled together like cattle seeking warmth. Dust and frost mingled in the air, creating a haze that turned the setting sun into a pale orange disk. Clara Edison stood at the edge of town, her thin shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. At 23, she had already seen more hardship than most women twice her age. Her husband had died of fever 6 months prior, leaving her with nothing but debts and a cast-iron pot that had belonged to her mother. The pot, now suspended over a small fire she'd built from gathered scraps of wood, contained the last of her provisions, a soup made from wild roots, a handful of beans she'd been saving, and herbs she'd foraged from the prairie. The aroma drifting from the pot was surprisingly rich, a skill she'd learned from her French grandmother back in Missouri. Even with meager ingredients, Clara could coax flavors that made people close their eyes and remember better times. It was perhaps the only thing of value she possessed, this ability to transform simple fare into something that warmed both body and soul. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Clara lifted the pot from the fire and made her way toward the town's main street, her boots, worn through at the toes and patched with scraps of leather, crunched on the frozen dirt. She'd walked for 3 days to reach Cedar Ridge, hearing rumors that the town was prosperous, that there might be work for a woman who could cook. The Brass Dollar Saloon spilled yellow light and raucous laughter into the street. Clara hesitated at the entrance, knowing full well that a respectable woman, even a desperate one, shouldn't enter such an establishment alone. But hunger and cold had a way of redefining respectability. She pushed through the swinging doors, the warmth hitting her face like a slap. The noise died immediately. 20 pairs of eyes turned to stare at her. Cowboys, merchants, gamblers, all frozen mid-drink or mid-card. A woman alone in a saloon was unusual enough, but one carrying a pot of soup was downright peculiar. "Excuse me," Clara said, her voice steadier than her hands. "I'm offering a bowl of hot soup in exchange for a night's lodging. Just a corner to sleep in, out of the cold." The silence stretched long enough for her to hear her own heartbeat. Then someone laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that triggered a cascade of snickers and guffaws. "Listen to that, boys." A bearded man in a leather vest slapped his knee. "She's peddling soup like it's worth something." "Maybe she seasons it with her tears," another called out, prompting more laughter. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she stood her ground. "It's good soup," she said simply, "made with care." "Honey, nobody here's hungry enough to trade shelter for whatever's in that pot," the bartender said, not unkindly, but firmly. "Best move along." Through the crowd, a movement caught her eye. In the far corner, partially hidden in shadow, sat a man who hadn't joined in the laughter. He wore a black coat of fine wool, and his hat, though dusty from travel, was clearly expensive, while others had dismissed her with barely a glance. His dark eyes studied her with an intensity that made her shift uncomfortably. James Cole, though everyone called him Jameson, had been nursing the same whiskey for an hour, a habit he'd developed since his wife's death 2 years prior. At 35, he owned more land and cattle than any other rancher in 3 counties, but wealth hadn't filled the hollow spaces in his life. He'd come to town on business, planning to leave at first light, but something about the woman with the soup pot made him pause. It wasn't her beauty, though she was pretty enough despite her obvious hardship. It was the way she held herself, proud despite her circumstances, dignified despite the mockery. And there was something else, something in her eyes that reminded him of his own reflection on the worst nights, a determination to survive that went beyond mere stubbornness. Clara turned to leave, her shoulders sagging slightly. As she reached the doors, Cole's voice cut through the renewed chatter. "Wait." The room quieted again. Cole stood, unfolding his considerable height, and walked toward her with the measured steps of a man who never hurried because the world waited for him. "What kind of soup?" he asked. Clara blinked, surprised. "Prairie vegetables, sir, with herbs." "I'll try a bowl." The bartender started to protest. "Mr. Cole, you don't need to—" Cole silenced him with a look. He produced a bowl from behind the bar clay, chipped but clean, and held it out to Clara. Her hands trembled slightly as she ladled the soup, steam rising between them like incense. Cole took a slow, deliberate sip. The room watched in fascination as his expression changed. Surprise, then something that might have been pleasure. He took another sip, then another. "This is excellent," he said quietly, and Clara could tell he meant it. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "My grandmother, sir, she was from France, came over as a young woman." Cole finished the bowl and set it down carefully. "What's your name?" "Clara Edison, sir. I'm a widow." He nodded, as if this confirmed something he'd already guessed. "Mrs. Edison. I run the Triple C Ranch about 5 miles north of here. I employ 15 men, and not one of them can cook worth a damn. I've been looking for someone who can manage a kitchen." The room stirred with whispers. The Triple C was legendary, 20,000 acres of prime grassland, thousands of head of cattle, a house that was more mansion than ranch dwelling. "I'm offering you a position," Cole continued. "Room, board, fair wages. You'd cook for the ranch hands and myself. Interested?" Clara's mind raced. This was far more than she dared hope for. But something in his eyes, a darkness, a weight, made her cautious. "That's very generous. Mr. Cole. Jameson Cole." He pulled out a pocket watch, checking the time with the same deliberate movements he applied to everything. "It's getting late. You can stay at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house tonight. I'll cover the cost. In the morning, if you're willing. I'll send a wagon to bring you to the ranch." "Mr. Cole," Clara said carefully, "I'm grateful, but I need to be clear. I'm offering my cooking skills, nothing more." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, the first anyone had seen from him in months. "Mrs. Edison, I assure you, it's your cooking I'm interested in, though I should warn you. Earning the respect of my men won't be easy. They're set in their ways." "I've faced worse than stubborn cowboys," Clara replied, and something in her tone made him believe it. Cole placed a gold piece on the bar, far more than necessary for the soup and lodging. "For your trouble," he said to the bartender, then turned back to Clara. "The wagon will come at 8. Be ready." He walked out without waiting for a response, leaving Clara standing in a room full of stunned faces. The gold piece gleamed on the scarred wood of the bar, and she realized that in the space of 10 minutes, her life had completely changed. The bartender cleared his throat. "Well, I'll be damned. Cole hasn't hired anyone for the house since his wife died. You must make one hell of a soup." Clara didn't respond. She was thinking about Cole's eyes, about the way he'd said, "earning the respect of my men," as if it were a warning. She'd accepted positions before, worked in kitchens and households, but something about this felt different, heavier, as if she were stepping into a story that had started long before her arrival. Mrs. Patterson's boarding house was clean but spare, the narrow bed a luxury after nights spent sleeping rough. Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what she'd agreed to. The Triple C Ranch was famous even in Missouri. She'd heard tales of its vast herds, its modern operations, its mysterious owner who'd built an empire but lost his heart. Outside, the wind howled across the prairie, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. Clara pulled the thin blanket higher and closed her eyes, trying not to think about tomorrow, about the wagon that would carry her into a new life, or perhaps into something she wasn't prepared for. 5 miles north, Jameson Cole stood at the window of his study, looking out at the darkness, The house around him was too large, too quiet, filled with rooms he no longer entered. He'd built it for Margaret, his wife, who'd loved entertaining, who'd filled the space with laughter and warmth. Now it felt like a tomb he happened to live in. He thought about the woman with the soup pot, about the pride in her bearing and the skill in her simple cooking. It had been an impulse to offer her the position he usually left such matters to his foreman. But something about her reminded him that life could have flavor again, that not everything had to taste like ash and regret. In the morning, everything would change. Clara Edison would arrive at the Triple C, and the careful emptiness he'd cultivated would be disrupted. He wasn't sure if that was what he wanted or what he feared. Perhaps they were the same thing. The coyote called again, closer now, and Cole turned away from the window. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. Tonight, for the first time in months, he'd tasted something other than his own bitterness, and that was enough. Back in town, Clara finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, her mother's cast-iron pot sitting in the corner like a faithful companion. She dreamed of kitchens and cowboys, of vast grasslands and lonely houses, of a man with dark eyes who'd tasted her soup and offered her shelter. But shelter, she would learn, came in many forms, and sometimes the price wasn't measured in coins or labor, but in the courage to help heal wounds that had nothing to do with the body and everything to do with the heart. The wind continued its assault on the small town of Cedar Ridge, but inside Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, Clara Edison slept on, unaware that she was about to become part of a story much larger than her own survival, a story of two broken people who would find, in the most unlikely circumstances, a reason to believe in tomorrow again. The wagon arrived precisely at 8 o'clock, driven by a weathered man who introduced himself as Thomas Jefferson, Jeff, the Triple C's foreman. His skeptical gaze took in Clara's meager belongings, one carpet bag, the cast-iron pot, and a small wooden box containing her grandmother's recipe notes and few precious spices. "That all you got?" Jeff asked. Not unkindly. "It's all I need," Clara replied, climbing onto the wagon seat with as much dignity as her patched dress would allow. The 5-mile journey to the Triple C Ranch gave Clara her first real glimpse of Jameson Cole's empire. The land stretched endlessly, marked by well-maintained fences and dotted with cattle that looked healthier than many people she'd known. Jeff, warming slightly to her quiet demeanor, pointed out landmarks and boundaries, pride evident in his voice despite his initial reservation. "Mr. Cole built this from nothing," he said as they crested a hill. "Came out here with just determination and a dream. Course, that was before—" He trailed off, jaw tightening. "Before his wife passed." Clara finished quietly. "I heard—" Jeff shot her a sharp look. "You hear a lot of things in town. Most of them ain't worth repeating." The ranch house appeared like a mirage on the prairie, 3 stories of limestone and timber, with wraparound porches and glass windows that caught the morning sun. It was magnificent and melancholy in equal measure. Too grand for its isolated setting, too empty despite its size. Clara's stomach tightened. This was no simple ranch kitchen she'd be managing. Jeff pulled the wagon around to the back entrance. "Kitchen's through here. I'll show you to your quarters first. Then you can meet the situation head-on." The situation, as Clara soon discovered, was a kitchen that hadn't seen proper management in 2 years. It was clean enough. Cole apparently insisted on that, but it lacked any sense of warmth or purpose. The massive cast-iron stove sat cold. The shelves were stocked with basic supplies, but no imagination. And the long wooden table meant to seat 20 bore the scars of hasty, joyless meals. "The men eat in the bunkhouse, mostly," Jeff explained. "Mr. Cole takes his meals in his study, alone." Clara set her pot on the stove with reverent care. And before when Mrs. Cole was alive. Jeff's expression softened. Margaret Cole could light up a room just by walking into it. This kitchen was her kingdom. She'd have the whole ranch in here some evenings, laughing and carrying on. Mr. Cole was different then. He'd actually smile. Clara nodded, understanding more than Jeff probably intended to reveal. She'd have to do more than cook. She'd have to bring life back to a place that had forgotten its purpose. When do the men expect their next meal? Supper's at 6, usually just beans and biscuits, sometimes beef if someone remembers to butcher. Clara rolled up her sleeves. Then I'd better get started. Mr. Jefferson. I'll need a complete inventory of what's available, and someone to show me the root cellar and smokehouse. Jeff blinked at her sudden transformation from quiet passenger to determined kitchen general. Yes, ma'am. I'll send young Franklin Roosevelt. We call him Frankie. He's good with details. As Jeff left, Clara surveyed her new domain properly. The kitchen was well equipped, with quality pots and pans gathering dust, sharp knives that hadn't been properly used, and spaces clearly designed for efficiency by someone who understood cooking. Margaret Cole's ghost lingered in the careful organization, the thoughtful placement of tools. Clara touched the cold stove, making a silent promise to the woman who'd come before her. This kitchen would live again. Frankie arrived within minutes, a eager boy of 16 with bright eyes and an encyclopedic knowledge of the ranch's stores. Together they cataloged resources that made Clara's eyes widen: barrels of flour, sugar, salt pork, dried beans, preserved vegetables, and even some spices that must have cost a fortune to transport. Mrs. Cole ordered these," Frankie explained, handling a jar of cinnamon like treasure. "Mr. Cole never canceled the standing orders, even after. Then we'll honor her memory by using them," Clara said firmly. "Now, tell me about the men. Any particular likes or dislikes I should know?" Frankie grinned. "They like food hot and plenty of it. Beyond that, they've gotten used to not expecting much." Clara spent the rest of the morning planning and preparing. She started bread dough rising, set beans to soak, and began a stock from beef bones she found in the cold storage. The familiar rhythms of cooking soothed her nerves, and soon the kitchen filled with promising aromas. Word traveled fast on a ranch. By noon, she had a steady stream of visitors finding excuses to pass by the kitchen. Cowboys who suddenly needed water, ranch hands remembering errands that took them past the windows. Clara ignored them all, focused on her work. At precisely 1 o'clock, a knock came at the kitchen door, not the back entrance the others used, but the door connecting to the main house. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and opened it to find Jameson Cole standing in the hallway. He looked different in daylight, in his own domain. The expensive clothes were replaced by well-worn work attire, but he carried the same air of contained authority. His eyes swept the kitchen, taking in the activity, the warmth beginning to radiate from the stove, the yeast scent of rising bread. "Why, Mrs. Edison, I trust you're settling in." "Yes, Mr. Cole, your kitchen is well appointed. Your late wife had excellent taste." Something flickered across his face. Pain, perhaps, or surprise that she'd mentioned Margaret directly. Most people, Clara had noticed, talked around the subject. "She did," he said quietly. Then, more briskly, "I came to discuss arrangements. Breakfast is at 5 for the hands. Earlier during busy seasons, lunch at noon, supper at 6. I take my meals." "In your study?" "Yes, Mr. Jefferson mentioned. But if I may suggest, Mr. Cole, food tastes better in proper surroundings. The dining room is closed." His tone brooked no argument. "My study will suffice." Clara recognized the walls he'd built and chose not to assault them directly. "Of course. Will you be taking lunch today?" He seemed surprised by the question. "I hadn't planned on it. I have soup ready. Nothing fancy, but it might give you a sense of what to expect." Before he could refuse, Clara ladled a generous portion into a bowl and set it on a tray with fresh-baked crackers she'd found in a tin. The soup was simple but rich, the kind that promised better things to come. Cole accepted the tray with obvious reluctance. "This isn't necessary. Mrs. Edison, you have enough to do preparing for the men. Cooking for one more is no trouble. Besides," she added with a slight smile, "you hired me for my skills. You should at least sample them properly." He left without another word, but Clara noticed he took the tray. The afternoon flew by in a whirlwind of preparation. By 5:30, she had the ranch hand's supper ready, pot roast with vegetables, fresh bread, butter, and apple pie made from preserved fruit. It was hearty fare, but elevated beyond their usual meals by careful seasoning and attention to detail. Jeff arrived to inspect the spread, his eyebrows rising. "This is considerable more than they're expecting." "Good food makes for good work," Clara replied. "Will you ring the dinner bell?" The men filed in with typical rowdiness that died immediately upon seeing the laden table. 20 cowboys stood frozen, as if afraid the bounty might vanish if they moved too quickly. "Well," Clara said, hands on her hips, "it won't eat itself." The dam broke. Men scrambled for seats, reaching for food with enthusiasm that made Clara hide a smile. Within minutes, the only sounds were chewing and occasional groans of appreciation. "Ma'am," one grizzled cowboy said through a mouthful of pot roast, "I ain't ate this good since my mama's table." Others nodded agreement, and Clara felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the stove. This was why she cooked. Not just to fill stomachs, but to remind people they were worth caring for. She was loading a tray for Cole when Jeff stopped her. "He won't like being fussed over." "I'm not fussing. I'm doing my job." She added a slice of pie to the tray. "Besides, when was the last time he ate a proper meal?" Jeff's silence was answer enough. Clara knocked on the study door, waiting for Cole's gruff "enter" before stepping inside. The room was all dark wood and leather, dominated by a massive desk covered in ledgers and correspondence. Cole sat behind it like a king in exile, isolated by his own choosing. "Your supper, Mr. Cole." She set the tray on a side table, noting the empty soup bowl from lunch. He glanced at the food, then at her. "The men seem pleased." "They're good men. They deserve good food." "And what do you deserve, Mrs. Edison?" The question caught her off guard. I have what I need. A position, a roof, honest work." "Is that all you aspire to?" Clara met his gaze steadily. "Right now, Mr. Cole, it's enough. We can't all afford grand aspirations." He studied her for a long moment. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Gratitude, deference, perhaps some attempt to ingratiate yourself?" Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I am grateful, but I won't grovel, if that's what you mean. You offered a fair exchange. My skills for wages and shelter, I intend to hold up my end with dignity." "Good." He turned back to his ledgers. "That's good." Clara left, unsure whether she'd passed or failed some test. But as she cleaned the kitchen, listening to the satisfied voices of the men dispersing to their evening tasks, she decided it didn't matter. She had work to do. Later that night, as Clara prepared for bed in her small but clean room off the kitchen, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Peering out, she glimpsed Cole carrying the empty supper tray back to the kitchen, something she was certain he hadn't done in years. He set it carefully by the sink, then stood for a moment in the darkened kitchen. In the moonlight streaming through the windows, Clara saw him touch the stove, now cooling but still warm, with something like wonder. She pulled back before he could see her, understanding instinctively that this was a private moment, a man remembering what his house had been, perhaps beginning to imagine what it could be again. As his footsteps faded, Clara allowed herself a small smile. It was a start. Rome wasn't built in a day, and hearts frozen by grief didn't thaw overnight. But good food, served with care and without pity, had a way of working its own quiet magic. Tomorrow she'd make cinnamon rolls for breakfast. The spice had been Margaret Cole's favorite. According to Frankie, it was time this kitchen remembered joy, even if its master wasn't quite ready to. Settling into bed, Clara whispered a prayer of thanks for this chance, this place, this purpose. She'd offered soup for shelter, but perhaps she'd found something more. Perhaps in feeding others, she might heal herself too. And somewhere in his too large study, Jameson Cole sat at his desk, not working but thinking. The pot roast had tasted of home, of comfort, of things he'd thought lost forever. For the first time in 2 years, he'd finished an entire meal. It was a small thing, but in the vast emptiness of his self-imposed exile, small things had a way of echoing, and echoes, he was beginning to remember, meant you weren't entirely alone. The weeks that followed Clara's arrival at the Triple C Ranch fell into a rhythm as steady as the prairie wind. Each morning before dawn, she rose to prepare breakfast, filling the kitchen with the scent of fresh bread and strong coffee. The ranch hands, initially suspicious of change, had become her most vocal supporters, their appreciation evident in cleaned plates and respectful nods. But not everyone was pleased with the new arrangements. On a particularly cold morning in late February, Clara was kneading dough when she heard voices raised in the yard. Through the frost-etched window, she saw Victoria Woodhull, the banker's widow from town, stepping down from an expensive carriage. Even at a distance, her disapproval was evident in every line of her posture. "I need to speak with Mr. Cole immediately," Victoria announced to Jeff, who'd met her at the door. Clara turned back to her work, but the kitchen's proximity to the main hallway meant she couldn't help overhearing the conversation that followed. "Jameson," Victoria's voice carried clearly. "The entire town is talking. You've installed some vagrant woman in your home." "Mrs. Edison is my cook. Victoria, nothing more." Cole's tone was controlled but edged with irritation. "People are saying she traded favors for shelter, that you picked her up from a saloon." Clara's hand stilled on the dough. She'd known gossip would follow her, but hearing it spoken so baldly still stung. "People say many things," Cole replied. "I've never found their opinions particularly relevant to running my ranch. But your reputation." "My reputation." Now there was steel in his voice. "Was it my reputation you were concerned with when you tried to buy the Riverside parcel last month, knowing I'd already made an offer, or when your late husband spread rumors about diseased cattle to drive down my prices?" Silence followed, then the sharp click of heels retreating. Clara resumed kneading, processing what she'd heard. So Cole had enemies, rivals who would use any excuse to undermine him? Her presence had given them ammunition. That evening, as she served supper to the hands, she noticed several men from town had joined them, unusual for a weeknight. Their eyes followed her with naked curiosity, and their voices carried whispers she was meant to overhear. "Living right here in the house," one muttered. "Bold as brass." "Henry says she was desperate enough to offer anything," another added. Clara served their plates with steady hands, meeting their stares with calm dignity. But inside, anger simmered. She'd done nothing wrong, yet her mere presence was being twisted into something sordid. After the meal, as she cleaned dishes, Jeff appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Don't let them bother you none. Mrs. Edison, small minds need something to chew on." "It's not me I'm worried about," Clara replied. "Mr. Cole doesn't deserve gossip because he offered honest work." Jeff studied her thoughtfully. Not many would worry about his reputation over their own. He's been nothing but proper and professional. I won't be the cause of people thinking otherwise. That night, Clara made a decision. If her presence was causing problems, she needed to address it directly. After preparing Cole's supper tray, she knocked on his study door with more determination than usual. "Come in." She entered to find him standing by the window, watching the last light fade from the sky. The lamp on his desk cast shadows that made him look older, wearier. "Your supper, Mr. Cole." She set the tray down but didn't immediately leave. "May I speak plainly?" He turned, eyebrow raised. "When have you not—" "I'm aware my presence here is causing talk in town. If you feel it would be better for me to seek employment elsewhere." "No." The word came sharp and fast. "No, Mrs. Edison. The opinions of gossips don't dictate my decisions." "But your standing in the community—" "My standing." He gave a bitter laugh. "I'm the man who buried his wife and his heart in the same day. They've been waiting for me to do something scandalous ever since. You're merely convenient fuel for their fires." Clara absorbed this, then asked quietly, "Is that why you keep yourself so isolated, to deny them satisfaction?" His eyes sharpened. "You oversee your boundaries, Mrs. Edison." "Perhaps, but isolation feeds gossip as surely as scandal does. When people don't see, they imagine." Cole moved to his desk. A clear dismissal. "Thank you for your concern. Good evening." But Clara wasn't finished. "The church social is next week. The ranch usually contributes food, doesn't it?" He looked up warily. "Margaret used to coordinate that." "Then allow me. I'll prepare enough for the entire gathering. Let them see there's nothing improper here, just a cook doing her job well." "You think a few pies will change minds?" "I think," Clara said carefully, "that hiding suggests guilt. Openness suggests innocence." Cole was quiet for a long moment. "Do as you think best," he finally said. "But don't expect miracles." The week leading to the church social passed in a blur of preparation. Clara threw herself into the work, preparing not just food but a statement. She would show the town exactly what kind of woman Jameson Cole had hired, a respectable widow who could cook circles around their prejudices. She baked dozens of pies, prepared gallons of her special recipe chili, and made enough cornbread to feed an army. The ranch hands volunteered to help transport everything, proud to show off their cook's skills. The morning of the social dawned clear but cold. Clara dressed in her best dress, still patched but pressed and spotlessly clean. She'd debated staying behind, letting the food speak for itself, but Jeff convinced her otherwise. "Hiding suggests shame," he'd said, echoing her own words to Cole. "You've nothing to be ashamed of." The church grounds were already busy when the CCC wagon arrived. Conversation stuttered to a halt as Clara climbed down, her arms full of covered dishes. She felt the weight of dozens of eyes but kept her head high, focusing on arranging her contributions on the communal tables. "Well," a familiar voice said behind her. Victoria Woodhull stood with a group of town matrons, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. "The mysterious Mrs. Edison." "Mrs. Woodhull." Clara inclined her head politely. "I hope you enjoy the meal." "I'm sure it's adequate. Though I wonder, is cooking all you provide at the CCC?" The insult was clear. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks but kept her voice level. "I provide what any professional cook would, good food and efficient kitchen management. Nothing more, nothing less." "How convenient that Mr. Cole happened to need a cook just when you needed shelter." Before the Clara could respond, another voice cut in. "Yes, it was fortunate for all of us." Clara turned to see Theodore Roosevelt, the town doctor, not to be confused with young Frankie at the ranch. Doctor Roosevelt was respected, his opinion carrying weight. "The boys from the CCC have been healthier this winter than any previous year," he continued. "Good nutrition makes a difference. Mrs. Edison's skills are exactly what that ranch needed." Other voices joined in. The general store owner mentioning increased orders for quality ingredients. The pastor's wife admitting the donated food was exceptional. Not everyone was convinced, but the tide of opinion was less uniformly hostile. Clara was serving chili when she noticed a commotion near the church steps. Jameson Cole had arrived, dressed in his formal black suit, looking uncomfortable but determined. It was, she realized, the first social event he'd attended since Margaret's death. The crowd parted as he walked directly to the food tables, to where Clara stood frozen with ladle in hand. "Mrs. Edison," he said formally, loud enough to carry, "I wanted to thank you publicly for your excellent work these past weeks. The Triple C is fortunate to have secured your services." He accepted a bowl of chili, tasted it with deliberate appreciation, then moved through the crowd with more social grace than his recent isolation would suggest. His presence, his public endorsement, shifted the atmosphere dramatically. Clara continued serving, but now people met her eyes, offered grudging nods, even occasional smiles. She wasn't fully accepted. That would take more time, but she was no longer a complete pariah. Later, as the social wound down, Clara was packing empty dishes when she found Cole standing beside the wagon. "That was unnecessary," she said quietly, "but thank you." "It was entirely necessary. I've let my grief excuse too much for too long." He helped her lift a heavy pot. "You were right. Isolation feeds speculation." They worked in silence for a moment before he added, "Margaret would have liked you. She believed in facing troubles head-on too." It was the first time he'd voluntarily mentioned his wife in conversation. Clara recognized the significance of the gesture. She must have been remarkable. She was, simple words, but weighted with emotion. She wouldn't approve of what I've let this place become. Cold, closed, cheerless. It doesn't have to stay that way. Cole looked at her then. Really looked at her. And Clara saw past his controlled exterior to the grief he carried like a physical weight. But there was something else, too. A flicker of possibility, quickly suppressed but unmistakable. "One step at a time, Mrs. Edison," he said finally. "Let's start with keeping the ranch fed. The rest, we'll see." The ride back to the Triple C was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence. Clara had faced down gossip and emerged, if not victorious, at least unblown. Cole had taken the first step out of his self-imposed exile, and somewhere in the space between employer and employee, something else was beginning to grow, fragile as spring grass but just as determined. That night, as Clara prepared a simple supper, she found herself humming, something she hadn't done in months. The kitchen was warm, the work satisfying. And for the first time since arriving at the Triple C, she felt she might actually belong here. Outside, a late winter storm was building, promising to blanket the prairie in snow. But inside the ranch house, warmth was spreading from the kitchen outward, carried on the scent of good food and the gradual thawing of frozen hearts. Change came slowly to the Nebraska prairie. Trust was earned in small gestures. Acceptance built one meal at a time, but Clara had learned patience from her grandmother, who'd crossed an ocean with nothing but hope and recipes. She could wait. She could endure whispers and weather storms, both literal and figurative. Because she'd seen that flicker in Jameson Cole's eyes, and she knew, with the instinct of someone who'd lost everything and survived, that sometimes the most profound changes began with the simplest acts, like sharing a bowl of chili at a church social, or admitting that a house could be warm again. The storm struck that night with fierce intensity, but the Triple C stood strong against it. In the kitchen, Clara kept the stove burning bright, a beacon against the dark. And in his study, Jameson Cole found himself listening to the sounds of life returning to his home. The clatter of pots, the whistle of wind through windows, the quiet humming of a woman who'd found her place. It wasn't love yet. It wasn't even friendship. Exactly. But it was a beginning. And on the prairie, where winter seemed endless and spring impossible, beginnings were their own form of miracle. Spring came late to the Nebraska prairie that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought more than just wildflowers and warming winds. It brought ghosts from the past that Clara had hoped would never find her. She was in the kitchen garden, planting herbs in the beds that had laid fallow since Margaret Cole's death, when she heard the sound of approaching horses, multiple riders, moving fast, her hand stilled on the rosemary seedling she'd been placing, a familiar dread creeping up her spine. Through the kitchen window, she watched 3 men dismount at the main entrance. Her heart nearly stopped when she recognized the lead rider, Ezekiel Carnegie, tall and lean, with the same calculating eyes that had once promised her the world before leaving her with nothing but debts and a broken trust. "Clara!" Ezekiel's voice boomed across the yard, deliberately loud, deliberately possessive. "There you are, darling. I've been searching everywhere." She forced herself to walk calmly to the kitchen door, wiping soil from her hands. The ranch hands working nearby had stopped their tasks, sensing trouble. "Mr. Carnegie," she kept her voice steady, formal. "You're not welcome here." His smile was the same one that had once charmed her, before she'd learned what lay beneath. "Now, is that any way to greet your fiancé?" "Former fiancé," Clara corrected sharply. "That ended when you disappeared with my father's money and left me to handle your creditors." Ezekiel dismounted with theatrical flair. His companions, rough men she didn't recognize, flanking him. "A misunderstanding, darling. Business complications. But I'm here now to make things right, to take you home where you belong. This is my home now. This," he gestured dismissively at the ranch. "Playing servant to some rich rancher, Clara. You're better than this. We had plans, dreams." "Your dreams, your plans, built on lies and other people's money." The kitchen door opened behind her, and she felt rather than saw Jameson Cole's presence. He moved to stand beside her, not touching but close enough that his intention was clear. "Gentlemen," Cole's voice was dangerously quiet. "You're on private property. State your business or leave." Ezekiel's eyes hardened as he took in Cole's protective stance. "Jameson Cole, I've heard about you, the grieving widower who took in my fiancé under questionable circumstances." "Former fiancé," Cole corrected, echoing Clara's words. "And Mrs. Edison is employed here as cook. Nothing questionable about honest work." "Honest," Ezekiel laughed, "ugly and knowing. Is that what you call it, a beautiful woman, alone, living in your house? Come now, Mr. Cole. We're men of the world." Clara felt Cole tense beside her, but before he could respond, Jeff appeared with several ranch hands, all armed, all ready. "Problem, boss?" Jeff asked mildly, but his hand rested on his pistol. Ezekiel raised his hands in mock surrender. "No problem. Just come to collect what's mine. See, Clara and I have unfinished business, financial obligations that need settling." Clara's blood ran cold. "I owe you nothing." "The law might see it differently. Those debts your father incurred. The ones I helped guarantee before his unfortunate passing. They became yours when you inherited his estate, and mine when we became engaged." "You forged those papers." "Prove it." His smile was triumphant. "I have documentation, witnesses. Either you come with me now, resume our engagement, or I'll have the sheriff seize whatever assets you have, including your wages here." Clara felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. She'd thought she'd escaped this nightmare, but Ezekiel had always been clever in the worst ways. "How much?" Cole's question cut through her panic. Ezekiel's eyes gleamed. "Ah, the wealthy rancher wants to play hero. It's substantial. Mr. Cole, more than a cook's wages could cover in a lifetime." "How much?" $5,000. The sum was staggering. Clara gasped, shaking her head. "That's impossible. The original debt was less than 500. Interest, darling. Penalties. Time has a way of multiplying obligations." Cole was silent for a long moment. Then, "I'll need to see these documents." "Jameson, no." Clara turned to him, desperate. "This isn't your problem. I won't have you." "Mrs. Edison." His formal tone stopped her protest. "Please go inside. Prepare lunch as usual. Mr. Carnegie and I have business to discuss." It wasn't a request. Clara looked between the two men, Ezekiel smirking, confident in his trap, Cole stone-faced but with something dangerous simmering beneath the surface. With effort. She turned and walked back to the kitchen, her legs unsteady. From the window, she watched Cole lead Ezekiel to his study, leaving the rough companions outside under Jeff's watchful eye. Her hands shook as she tried to focus on meal preparation, but her mind raced. $5,000, more money than she'd see in a lifetime. Ezekiel had crafted his trap well, knowing she'd never be able to pay, knowing it would force her back under his control. An hour passed, then 2. The ranch hands ate their lunch in unusual silence, everyone aware something significant was happening. Clara served mechanically, her thoughts elsewhere. Finally, the study door opened. Ezekiel emerged, his expression harder to read now. He signaled his men, and they mounted without a word. But before leaving, he caught Clara's eye through the window. 3 days, darling, he called out. That's what your Mr. Cole negotiated. 3 days to get affairs in order. Then you come with me, or I file papers with the sheriff. Your choice. They rode off in a cloud of dust, leaving Clara standing frozen in her kitchen. Cole remained in the doorway of his study, watching them go, then disappeared back inside without a word. Clara found him there an hour later. When she brought his lunch tray with trembling hands, he sat behind his desk, several documents spread before him. Mr. Cole, the papers appear legitimate, he said without looking up, though I suspect they're cleverly forged, proving that would take time we don't have. I won't go with him. The words came out fiercer than she intended. I'd rather go to debtor's prison. Now he did look up, and something in his expression made her breath catch. That won't be necessary. I can't ask you to pay. You're not asking, I'm offering. He stood, moving around the desk. Mrs. Edison, Clara, I have a proposition. Her heart hammered. She'd heard such words before, from Ezekiel, and they'd led to ruin. A business arrangement. Cole continued carefully. Beneficial to both parties. I pay the debt, breaking Carnegie's hold over you. In exchange, he paused, seeming to gather himself. In exchange, you agree to a longer-term employment contract, 5 years, with terms to be negotiated. Your skills have proven valuable to the ranch's operations. Clara stared at him. 5 years of cooking wouldn't equal $5,000. Then we expand your duties. Household management, hosting when I entertain business associates. The ranch needs a woman's touch again. The last words came with difficulty. That's still too generous. Why would you? Because I despise men like Carnegie who prey on vulnerable women. Because you've brought something back to this house that I thought was gone forever. Because... He stopped abruptly, jaw tightening. Because it's a sound business decision. Clara studied his face, seeing more than he probably intended to reveal. There's another option, she said quietly. One that would give legal protection against any claims Ezekiel might make. Cole went very still. What option? Her cheeks burned, but she forced herself to continue. Marriage. A business arrangement. As you said, you need someone to manage your household. To help you rejoin society, I need protection from Ezekiel and his schemes. A husband's rights supersede a former fiancé's claims. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Cole turned to the window, his back to her. You don't know what you're suggesting. I'm suggesting a partnership, mutual benefit, mutual respect. Nothing that either party doesn't freely agree to. I can't. His voice was raw. Margaret. I'm not trying to replace your wife, Jameson. His given name slipped out unbidden. I'm trying to save us both. You from your isolation, me from a fate worse than death. He turned then, and she saw the war in his eyes, Grief battling against loneliness, duty against desire, past against possibility. It wouldn't be fair to you, a marriage in name only. Would be more than I have now. And who knows, in time, perhaps we could build something, friendship, if nothing else. Carnegie won't give up easily. He'll make trouble. Then we'll face it together. Isn't that what partners do? Cole moved closer. Close enough that she could see the gray threading through his dark hair, the lines that grief had etched around his eyes. If we do this, he said slowly, we do it properly. A real marriage in the eyes of the law and the community. I won't have you subjected to more gossip. Clara's pulse raced. Agreed! You'll have your own room, of course, your independence. I won't demand anything you're not willing to give. I know. And she did. Whatever his faults, Jameson Cole was an honorable man. Carnegie will be furious. Let him. A wife can't be forced to honor a previous engagement. Cole was quiet for a long moment, then extended his hand. Then we have an agreement. Mrs. Edison. She placed her hand in his, surprised by the warmth, the calluses that spoke of a man who worked alongside his men despite his wealth. We have an agreement, Mr. Cole. He held her hand a moment longer than necessary, something shifting in his expression. We'll need to act quickly, tomorrow, if possible. Can you be ready? I've been ready for a new life since the day I arrived here. That night, the ranch buzzed with the news. Jeff, after his initial shock, offered gruff congratulations. The hands were divided between those who thought it romantic and those who saw it as a practical arrangement. Clara didn't care. She had work to do. She spent the evening altering her best dress, the one she'd worn to the church social. It wasn't white. She was a widow, after all. But the soft blue brought out her eyes. As she sewed, she thought about the turn her life had taken. She'd come here offering soup for shelter. Now she was about to become mistress of one of the largest ranches in the territory. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Cole stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable. I wanted to give you this. He held out a small velvet box. It was my mother's. Not as fine as Margaret's jewels, but I thought, for appearances. Clara opened the box to find a simple gold band with a small sapphire. It was modest, tasteful, perfect. It's beautiful, she said softly. Thank you. Clara. He seemed to struggle with words. I want you to know that this isn't just about Carnegie or the debt, these past months. You've made me remember what it's like to be alive. I can't promise to be the husband you deserve, but I'll try to be worthy of this choice. Tears pricked her eyes. We'll both try. That's all anyone can do. He nodded, started to leave, then turned back. Wear your hair down tomorrow. You have beautiful hair. Then he was gone, leaving Clara touching the ring with wonder. It wasn't a love match, not yet, but it was built on something perhaps stronger: mutual respect, shared purpose, and the fragile hope that two broken people might help each other heal. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Clara dressed carefully, leaving her hair loose as requested, the waves catching the morning light. When she emerged from her room, she found the entire household assembled, ranch hands in their cleanest clothes, Jeff beaming like a proud father. Cole waited by the door, dressed in his best suit, looking nervous but determined. When he saw her, something softened in his face. You look lovely, he said simply, offering his arm. The ride to town passed in a blur. Word had somehow spread, and it seemed half the population lined the streets to watch them pass. Clara held her head high, meeting curious gazes with calm dignity. Judge Benjamin Harrison, old and wise, performed the ceremony in his study with Jeff and Dr. Roosevelt as witnesses. The words were simple, the promises basic, but Clara felt their weight. When Cole slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands were steady, his voice clear. I now pronounce you husband and wife." Judge Harrison intoned, "You may kiss your bride." Cole hesitated, then leaned in to brush the lightest of kisses across her lips. It was barely a touch, but Clara felt it like lightning, unexpected and illuminating. They emerged to find Ezekiel waiting in the street, his face twisted with rage. "You think this changes anything?" he snarled. "I'll contest it. Claim undue influence." "Try it," Cole said mildly. "My lawyers will be interested in examining those debt documents under oath. I suspect forgery charges carry significant penalties." Ezekiel paled, recognizing the trap he'd walked into. He'd pushed too hard, and now faced a powerful man with resources to fight back. "This isn't over," he managed, but the threat rang hollow. "Yes," Cole said firmly. "It is. My wife and I have a ranch to run. Good day, Mr. Carnegie." As they rode home, Clara marveled at the word. She felt Ezekiel's stare burning into her back, but she didn't turn around. That part of her life was finished. "Thank you," she said quietly to Cole. "We're partners now," he replied. "Partners protect each other." Back at the ranch, an impromptu celebration had begun. The hands had decorated the kitchen with wildflowers, and someone had brought out a fiddle for the first time in 2 years. Music filled the Triple C. That evening, as Clara prepared supper in her kitchen, still hers. Despite everything that had changed, she found Cole watching from the doorway. "No tray tonight," he said. "I'll eat in the dining room. It's time." She smiled, understanding the significance. "I'll set 2 places." "Yes," he agreed, returning her smile with a tentative one of his own. 2 places. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. They were still strangers in many ways, still carrying their separate griefs and fears. But as they sat across from each other in the dining room that had been closed for 2 years, sharing a simple meal and cautious conversation, Clara felt the beginning of something real. Outside, the prairie wind sang its eternal song, but inside the Triple C Ranch, 2 people were learning that sometimes the most unexpected partnerships yielded the strongest foundations, and that love, when it finally came, might arrive not in grand gestures but in quiet moments, a shared meal, a protective stance, a ring that had waited decades to find its true home. The ghost of Ezekiel Carnegie would fade, as all ghosts do when faced with the solid reality of people who choose to build rather than destroy. And in a kitchen that smelled of herbs and hope, a new chapter was beginning. One recipe, one day, one carefully tended trust at a time. The summer heat had settled over the Nebraska prairie like a heavy blanket, turning the grasslands golden and the sky into an endless blue dome. 3 months had passed since Clara and Jameson's unexpected marriage, and the Triple C Ranch had found its rhythm again, but beneath the surface of domestic tranquility, tensions simmered like the heat waves rising from the parched earth. Clara wiped sweat from her brow as she checked the preserves she'd been putting up all week. The root cellar was filling nicely with provisions for winter, a task she'd undertaken with determined efficiency. She'd learned that keeping busy helped avoid the awkward moments when she and Jameson found themselves alone, still navigating the boundaries of their unusual arrangement. "Mrs. Cole." Young Frankie Roosevelt burst through the kitchen door, his face flushed with exertion. "Fire, there's smoke rising from the north pasture." Clara's blood ran cold. In this dry weather, fire was every rancher's nightmare. She ran outside, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. Sure enough, a dark column of smoke rose in the distance. Too controlled to be wildfire, too large to be campfire. "Ring the bell," she ordered Frankie. "Get every hand available." The boy ran for the alarm bell as Clara hurried to the main barn. She could already see riders heading out, Jameson's tall figure leading them at full gallop. Her husband, the word still felt strange, had been inspecting the herds when the fire started. Within minutes, the ranch exploded into organized chaos. Men grabbed buckets, shovels, wet burlap sacks, anything that could fight fire. Clara coordinated from the kitchen, preparing water stations and bandages, knowing injuries were likely. Jeff thundered up on his horse, his face grim. "It's the horse barn, Mrs. Cole, the new one we just finished building. Someone said it deliberately." The horses. Still inside, at least 20 head, including Mr. Cole's Arabian bloodstock. Without thinking, Clara grabbed her skirts and ran. The Arabian horses were Jameson's pride, purchased at great expense to improve the ranch's breeding program. More than that, she knew he'd bought them with Margaret, the last project they'd planned together before her death. By the time she reached the burning barn, the scene was chaos. Orange flames licked at the structure's walls while smoke billowed black and thick. Men formed bucket brigades, but it was clearly a losing battle. The screams of terrified horses pierced the air. Jameson stood near the entrance, his face twisted in anguish as ranch hands tried unsuccessfully to enter the smoke-filled building. The heat was too intense, the smoke too thick. "The roof's going to collapse," someone shouted. "Get back!" "No!" Jameson started forward, but Jeff and another hand held him back. "The horses, Margaret's horses." Clara made a decision born of instinct rather than thought. Grabbing a water bucket, she doused herself thoroughly, then snatched a wet blanket from a pile. "The side door," she said to Frankie, who stood nearby. "Is it blocked?" "I don't think so. But Mrs. Cole, you can't—" She was already running. The side entrance was smaller, used for moving feed. The smoke was thinner here, though still choking. Clara dropped to her knees, crawling beneath the worst of it, the wet blanket over her head. Inside was like stepping into hell. The heat seared her lungs, and the smoke made her eyes stream. But she could hear the horses, their panic driving them against their stall doors. Working by feel and instinct, she found the first stall latch. The mare inside nearly trampled her in its desperation to escape. Clara pressed against the wall, letting it pass, then moved to the next stall, and the next. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred, but she kept going. These animals trusted humans to keep them safe. She wouldn't fail them. She'd freed perhaps a dozen horses when her strength began to fail. The smoke was too thick, the heat too intense. She stumbled, coughing, the wet blanket now dry and useless. Disoriented, she couldn't find the door she'd entered through. Then strong arms wrapped around her, lifting her, through streaming eyes. She saw Jameson's face, set in lines of desperate determination. He carried her through the smoke, following the sound of men shouting, until suddenly they burst into blessed fresh air. Clara collapsed on the grass, coughing violently. Someone poured water over her head while Dr. Roosevelt checked her breathing, but her eyes sought Jameson, who knelt beside her, his own clothes singed and smoking. "The horses," she managed between coughs. "Most got out," Jeff reported, appearing at Jameson's shoulder. "Thanks to Mrs. Cole, we saved 18 of the 22. Jameson's hand found hers, gripping tightly. "You could have died." "So could you," she pointed out, her voice raspy. "You came in after me. I couldn't—" His voice broke. "I couldn't lose you, too." The admission hung between them, more intimate than any moment they'd shared since their wedding. Around them, men continued fighting the fire, but it was clear the barn was lost. The focus now was preventing spread to other buildings. "Who did this?" Clara asked, though she suspected she already knew. Jeff's expression darkened. "Found tracks leading to the road, 3 riders, heading toward town. And this." He held up a piece of fabric caught on a fence post, expensive wool, the kind Ezekiel Carnegie favored. Jameson's face went cold. "Get the sheriff, now." As Jeff rode off, Jameson helped Clara to the house, Dr. Roosevelt following. She protested she was fine, but her legs wobbled treacherously. The doctor prescribed rest and plenty of water for the smoke inhalation. "You're lucky," he said sternly. "Both of you. Heroics are admirable, but not when they nearly cost lives." After he left, Jameson sat on the edge of Clara's bed, studying her with an intensity that made her nervous. "Why?" he asked simply. "They were Margaret's horses." Clara said softly, "I knew what they meant to you." His jaw worked. "They're just animals. You risked your life. You would have done the same. You were trying to when I went in." "That's different." "Why? Because you're a man. Because it's your ranch." Clara struggled to sit up, ignoring her spinning head. "I'm your wife, Jameson. This ranch is my responsibility too." "You're my wife in name." "Is that all?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Is that really all I am to you after these months?" He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, the ruins of the barn still smoldered, ranch hands keeping watch for flare-ups. "You know what Carnegie's capable of now," he said, changing the subject. "This won't be his last attempt." "Then we stop him, together." "Clara!" "No." She pushed herself out of bed, swaying slightly but standing firm. "I'm tired of dancing around this. Jameson, we married for practical reasons, yes, but somewhere along the way, things changed. At least for me." He turned, his expression unreadable. "Clara, don't—" "I care about you," she pressed on, heart hammering. "I care about this ranch, these people. When I saw that fire, all I could think about was what losing those horses would do to you. Not because they're valuable, but because—" Her words were cut off as Jameson crossed the room in 2 strides, cupping her face in his soot-stained hands. "You infuriating woman," he said roughly. "Do you know what I thought when I saw you run into that barn? Do you know what went through my mind?" Clara shook her head mutely. "I thought I was about to lose everything that mattered. Again." His thumbs traced her cheekbones. "These past months, you've brought life back to this place. To me. And I've been too much a coward to admit it. Jameson?" "I love you," he said simply. "Not as some replacement for Margaret, not as a business arrangement. I love you, Clara Edison Cole, for your courage and your kindness and your absolutely terrible judgment in risking yourself for horses." Tears streamed down Clara's cheeks, cutting tracks through the soot. "I love you too, even when you're being stubborn and closed off and eating alone in your study like a hermit." He laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. Then he kissed her, and it was nothing like their wedding day peck. This was fire and promise and the desperate relief of walls finally crumbling. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Jameson rested his forehead against hers. "We still have Carnegie to deal with." "Let him come," Clara said fiercely. "He'll find we're not so easy to break." A knock at the door interrupted them. Jeff entered, Sheriff Ulysses Grant behind him. "Found them," the sheriff reported. "Carnegie and 2 accomplices, reeking of kerosene. They're in custody, but Carnegie's demanding to speak with you, Mr. Cole." Jameson's arms tightened around Clara. "He can rot." "Actually," Sheriff Grant said carefully, "you might want to hear what he has to say. Seems he's got information about the fire that killed your wife." The room went absolutely still. Clara felt Jameson turn to stone against her. "What kind of information?" His voice was deadly quiet. "Claims it wasn't an accident. Says he knows who was responsible." Clara gripped Jameson's hand. "It's a trick. He's desperate." "Maybe," Sheriff Grant agreed. "But he's offered to confess to today's arson and provide proof about the original fire in exchange for reduced charges." Jameson pulled away from Clara, his face a mask. "I'll see him." "Jameson!" "No, this is what he wants." "I need to know." He looked at her, and she saw the old pain resurface. "If there's even a chance Margaret's death wasn't an accident, I need to know." Clara's heart broke for him, but she nodded. "Then I'm coming with you." He started to protest, then seemed to recognize the futility. "You're as stubborn as those horses you saved?" "Someone has to keep you from doing something foolish." They dressed quickly. Clara in a clean dress, Jameson in fresh clothes. The ride to town was tense, Sheriff Grant filling them in on the arrest. Carnegie had been caught red-handed but seemed almost pleased about it, which worried Clara deeply. The jail was small, just 2 cells in the back of the sheriff's office. Carnegie sat in one, still managing to look arrogant despite his circumstances. His accomplices huddled in the other cell, clearly less confident about their situation. "Ah, the happy couple," Carnegie drawled as they entered. "How touching. Tell me, Clara, does he know about Baltimore?" Clara stiffened, but Jameson's hand on her back steadied her. "Say what you came to say." "Carnegie." "Straight to business. I admire that." Carnegie leaned against the bars. "Your wife's death. Cole. Tragic accident. Everyone said lantern knocked over in the stable. Spread too fast to save her. Get to the point." "What if I told you the lantern didn't fall by accident? What if someone wanted your wife gone?" "I'd say you're lying to save your own skin." Carnegie smiled coldly. "Victoria Woodhull. Ask her about the land deal your wife opposed. Ask her where she was the night of the fire." "Victoria," Jameson's voice reflected his shock. "That's absurd. She and Margaret were friends." "Were they, or was Margaret just too trusting to see the viper in her parlor?" Carnegie's eyes glittered with malice. "Victoria wanted the water rights to Copper Creek. Your wife refused to sell, with Margaret gone. She thought you'd be easier to manipulate." Clara watched Jameson process this information, saw the doubt creep in. Victoria had been pushing hard for that land sale recently, using their supposed friendship as leverage. "You're claiming Victoria murdered Margaret for water rights." "I'm claiming she arranged an accident. There's a difference, legally speaking." Carnegie produced a small leather journal from his jacket. "But don't take my word for it. This belonged to one of her former employees. Poor fool wrote everything down before he drank himself to death. Dates, payments, plans." Sheriff Grant took the journal, flipping through it. His expression grew increasingly grim. "This is detailed." "Why?" Jameson's voice was raw. "Why tell me this now?" Carnegie's smile turned cruel. "Because Clara humiliated me. Because you took what was mine. Consider it a wedding gift. The knowledge that your perfect first wife was murdered by someone you trust. Live with that, Cole. Live with knowing you failed to protect her." Jameson lunged forward, but Clara and the sheriff held him back. Carnegie laughed, the sound echoing off the stone walls. "The truth hurts, doesn't it? At least I'm honest about what I am." Victoria hides behind respectability while blood stains her hands. "We're done here," Clara said firmly, guiding Jameson toward the door. "Sheriff, you have your confession for the arson." "In writing," Sheriff Grant confirmed. "Carnegie, you'll hang for this if the journal proves false." "Oh, it's real," Carnegie assured them. "Every damning word." Outside, Jameson stood rigid, staring at nothing. Clara waited, knowing he needed time to process the revelation. The street was quiet, most folks inside escaping the afternoon heat. "If it's true," he said finally, "if Victoria really—" "I invited her into my home. I let her comfort me at Margaret's funeral. "You couldn't have known?" Clara took his arm gently. "Jameson, this might all be lies. Carnegie's desperate." "The journal." Jameson interrupted. "If there's even a chance it's real, I have to know." Sheriff Grant emerged from the jail. "I'll need to verify this information. Interview witnesses. It'll take time." "Do it," Jameson said flatly. "Whatever it takes." The ride home was silent. Clara could feel Jameson withdrawing, building walls she'd just helped tear down. When they reached the ranch, he headed immediately for his study. Jameson. I need time. Clara, please. She watched him go, heart aching. They'd finally admitted their feelings, finally stepped toward a real marriage, only to have the past rear up between them. The ranch hands had contained the fire completely, though the barn was a total loss. Clara threw herself into organizing the cleanup, providing food and water for the exhausted men. But her thoughts kept returning to Jameson, alone in his study with his ghosts. As evening fell, she prepared a dinner tray, determined not to let him slip back into isolation. She found him at his desk, the leather journal open before him. "You need to eat," she said simply, setting the tray down. "Did you know," his voice was hollow, "in Baltimore, did you know Carnegie was involved with people like this?" Clara's chest tightened. Baltimore, the life she'd tried to leave behind. "I knew he had questionable associates. It's one reason I tried to break the engagement, but my father owed him money, and he used that to control you." Jameson looked up, eyes blazing. "Just like Victoria used friendship to get close to Margaret." "We don't know that's true yet. The dates match, the details about the ranch, about Margaret's routines. Only someone close could know those things." He slammed the journal shut. "I failed her. Clara, failed to see the danger, failed to protect her." Clara moved around the desk, kneeling beside his chair. "You loved her? You trusted her friend. That's not failure, that's being human. I should have known." "How?" "By suspecting everyone, by living in fear." She gripped his hands. "Jameson, if this is true, it's horrible, but Margaret wouldn't want you to torture yourself, and she wouldn't want you to push away the future because of the past." He was quiet for a long moment, then pulled her up into his lap, burying his face in her shoulder. She held him as tremors ran through his strong frame, grief renewed by betrayal. "I can't lose you too," he whispered. "When I saw you in that fire today." "You won't," she promised. "We're stronger together. Remember, whatever comes next, we face it together." They stayed like that as darkness fell. Two souls finding anchor in each other while storms raged around them. Tomorrow would bring investigations, confrontations, the messy business of uncovering truth. But tonight, they had this, the simple comfort of shared strength, of love declared despite the shadows. The Triple C Ranch had survived fire. Its owners would survive revelations. And in the kitchen where Clara had first offered soup for shelter, new bonds were forging in the crucible of crisis, stronger than fear, deeper than loss, more enduring than the schemes of those who sought to destroy them. The night wind carried the scent of smoke and possibilities, and in a study that had been a tomb, two hearts began the slow work of building a future on the ashes of the past. One breath, one touch, one promises at a time. The investigation into Margaret Cole's death had consumed 2 weeks, turning the entire county upside down. Sheriff Grant, thorough and methodical, had interviewed dozens of witnesses, examined financial records, and slowly built a case that shocked even the most cynical residents of Cedar Ridge. Victoria Woodhull, pillar of society and widow of the town's banker, was arrested on charges of conspiracy to commit murder. Clara stood at the kitchen window, watching the morning sun paint the prairie gold. The ranch had been subdued since the arrest, everyone processing the revelation that someone they'd trusted could harbor such darkness. Jameson had thrown himself into rebuilding the burned barn, working alongside his men from dawn to dusk, trying to exhaust himself into forgetting. "Mrs. Cole." Jeff appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. "There's been news from town. Carnegie's trial is set for next week. They'll need you and Mr. Cole to testify." Clara nodded, having expected this. "How's Jameson handling it?" Jeff's weathered face showed concern. "He's working himself to the bone. Won't talk about it. Just keeps building like he can hammer away the past." Through the window, Clara could see her husband directing the barn construction, his movements sharp with suppressed emotion. They'd barely spoken beyond necessities since Victoria's arrest. The intimacy they'd found in crisis buried under fresh grief. "Thank you. Jeff, I'll speak with him." She found Jameson measuring lumber, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the cool morning. The other workers gave them space, recognizing the need for privacy. "You missed breakfast again," Clara said quietly. "Wasn't hungry." He didn't look up from his measurements. "Jameson." "I'm fine. Clara." His tone was clipped, dismissive. "No, you're not." She stepped closer, forcing him to acknowledge her presence. "And neither am I. We can't go on like this." He finally met her eyes, and she saw the torment there. "Every time I close my eyes, I see Margaret, see her trusting Victoria, welcoming her. I see the fire." "I know." Clara touched his arm gently. "But shutting me out won't bring her back. It won't change what happened. I brought you into this danger. Carnegie targeted you because of me. The fire was not your fault." She gripped his shoulders, making him face her fully. "None of this is your fault. Evil people made evil choices. You're not responsible for their darkness." "Aren't I? I should have seen." "What? That your wife's friend was capable of murder, that Carnegie would resort to arson." Clara's voice rose with frustration. "You're not God. Jameson, you're a man who loved his wife and trusted the wrong people. That makes you human, not guilty." He stared at her for a long moment. Then something seemed to break inside him. His shoulders sagged, the hammer dropping from his hand. "I'm terrified," he admitted roughly. "Terrified of losing you the way I lost her. When I saw you run into that fire..." Clara pulled him into her arms. "Not caring who might see, you didn't lose me. You saved me. Remember, we saved each other." They stood there among the lumber and sawdust, holding each other while the ranch life continued around them. It wasn't a magical healing, the wounds were too fresh for that, but it was a start, a reconnection after days of distance. That evening, for the first time since the fire, Jameson joined Clara for dinner in the dining room. Conversation was stilted at first, but gradually the walls began to lower. They talked about the barn reconstruction, the upcoming harvest, anything but the trial looming ahead. As Clara cleared the dishes, Jameson caught her hand. "I'm sorry. For pulling away? Margaret used to say I retreated into myself when hurt, like a wounded bear." "She knew you well." "She did." His thumb traced circles on Clara's palm. "She would have liked you, I think. Would have appreciated your strength. I wish I could have known her. Sometimes I see pieces of her in you, not in looks or manner, but in spirit, the way you care for others, the way you refuse to be cowed by difficulty." He brought her hand to his lips. "I fell in love with you for who you are. Clara, not as some echo of the past. I need you to know that." Tears pricked Clara's eyes. "I know, just as I love you for the man you are now, not despite your grief, but including it." They were interrupted by urgent knocking at the door. Frankie Roosevelt burst in, eyes wide with alarm. "Mr. Cole, Mrs. Cole, there's riders coming, lots of them, and they don't look friendly." Jameson was already reaching for his rifle. Through the window, Clara could see torches bobbing in the darkness, at least a dozen riders approaching fast. Her blood ran cold. "Carnegie's men?" she asked. "He's in jail," Jameson reminded her, but his expression was grim. "Get to the root cellar, now!" "I'm not hiding." "Clara, please!" His voice was desperate. "I can't protect the ranch and worry about you." Before she could argue further, Jeff and several hands burst through the door, all armed. "They're surrounding the house, boss." Recognized a few hired guns from the territories. The lead rider's voice boomed across the yard. "Jameson Cole, we've got business to discuss. Come out peaceful-like, and nobody else gets hurt." Clara recognized that voice with sickening certainty. "That's William Vanderbilt, Carnegie's business partner from back east." Jameson's jaw tightened. So Carnegie had backup plans. What could they want? Carnegie's already confessed. The water rights. Jeff said suddenly. Same thing Victoria wanted, with Carnegie in jail and Victoria arrested. Someone else is making a play. Jameson checked his ammunition. How many men do we have? 8 here, maybe 6 more in the bunkhouse if they can get to their guns. Not enough. Jameson moved to the window, assessing positions. They've got us outnumbered and surrounded. Cole, Vanderbilt called again. I'm offering you a deal. Sign over the Copper Creek water rights, and we ride away. Nobody has to die tonight. Those rights are worth a fortune. Jeff muttered. Control the water. Control the whole valley's cattle operations. Clara's mind raced. They were outnumbered, outgunned. But surrender meant giving up everything Jameson had built, everything Margaret had died protecting. I need to think, Jameson called out. Give me 10 minutes. 5, Vanderbilt countered. Then we come in shooting. Jameson turned from the window. His face set. Jeff, get the men positioned at windows. Make every shot count if it comes to that. Clara. I can shoot. She moved to the gun cabinet, pulling out a hunting rifle. My father taught me. Of course he did, Jameson muttered, but there was pride mixed with the fear in his eyes. Stay low, away from windows. Wait. Clara held up a hand, an idea forming. Vanderbilt doesn't know about Victoria's arrest, does he? He's been traveling. Probably not. Why? Then he doesn't know the whole plan is blown. The sheriff has evidence connecting Carnegie to Victoria to the water rights scheme. She grabbed Jameson's arm. We don't need to fight. We need to stall. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Frankie, can you slip out the back? Get to town? The boy nodded eagerly. I know every trail. Mr. Cole, they'll never see me. Get to Sheriff Grant. Tell him what's happening. Ride like the devil's chasing you. As Frankie slipped away into the darkness, Jameson called out to Vanderbilt. I'll need to see legal papers. Can't sign anything without proper documentation. Always the businessman. Vanderbilt laughed. Fine, but no tricks. Cole. The waiting was agony. Clara positioned herself at an upstairs window, rifle ready, watching the torch-bearing riders below. Jameson moved between defensive positions, quietly encouraging his men. 20 minutes passed. 30. Vanderbilt was getting impatient. Threats escalating. Then, just as Clara feared violence would erupt, she heard it hoofbeats. Lots of them. Sheriff Grant's voice cut through the night. William Vanderbilt, you're surrounded by duly appointed lawmen. Throw down your weapons. The relief was overwhelming. Vanderbilt's men, hired guns with no loyalty beyond payment, quickly realized they were now outnumbered by legitimate authority. One by one, weapons hit the ground. As Vanderbilt was led away in shackles, still blustering about his rights, Sheriff Grant approached the house. Carnegie sang like a canary when he heard about this. Gave us names, dates, the whole conspiracy. Seems water rights weren't the only thing they were after they had plans for half the valley's properties. Is it over? Clara asked, exhaustion hitting her suddenly. This part is, there'll be trials, but with Carnegie and Vanderbilt's testimony against each other, plus Victoria's connection, the sheriff shook his head. You folks have been through enough. It's time for some peace. After the sheriff and his men left with their prisoners, the ranch slowly settled back to normal. The hands returned to the bunkhouse, adrenaline fading into tired relief. Clara found Jameson standing on the porch, staring out at the now quiet prairie. You were brilliant, he said as she joined him. The stalling idea saved lives. We make a good team. She leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. We do. He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. Clara, these past weeks, I've been so focused on the past, I nearly lost sight of the future. Our future. We have time, she assured him. To heal, to build, to live. he finished. Really live, not just survive. He turned to face her fully. I want children with you, Clara. I want to fill this house with laughter again. I want to wake up every morning grateful for the present instead of mourning the past. Is that something you want too? Clara's heart swelled. Yes to all of it. He kissed her then, deep and sure, full of promise. When they broke apart, both were breathless. Let's go inside, he said softly. It's been a long night. Our room, she asked hopefully. They'd maintained separate bedrooms since their marriage, but tonight that seemed foolish. Our room, he confirmed, taking her hand, as they walked through the house that had seen so much sorrow. Clara felt a shift in the air. The ghosts weren't gone, they might never be entirely, but they no longer ruled here. Life was claiming victory over death, love over loss. In the kitchen, her cast-iron pot sat on the stove, ready for tomorrow's meals. It had traveled far from that desperate night when she'd offered soup for shelter. Now she had so much more: a home, a husband who loved her, a future bright with possibility. The trials would come, justice would be served, and the guilty would face consequences. But that was tomorrow's business. Tonight, Clara Cole lay in her husband's arms, listening to his heartbeat, feeling the solid reality of survival and love. Outside, dawn crept across the prairie, painting the sky in shades of hope. The Triple C Ranch stood strong against it, no longer a monument to loss, but a testament to resilience. In the kitchen where it all began, sunlight touched the windows, promising new days, new chances, new life growing from the ashes of the old. The water rights remained secure, the land protected, the future assured. And in the heart of it all, two people who'd found each other in the darkness discovered that sometimes the greatest treasures came not from what we sought, but from what we were brave enough to accept when offered love, trust, and the courage to begin again. The epilogue to their night of terror would be written in peaceful days, in children's laughter, in the steady rhythms of ranch life. But for now, Clara smiled against Jameson's shoulder, thinking of her grandmother who'd crossed an ocean with nothing but recipes and hope. She would be proud, Clara whispered. Who? Jameson asked sleepily. My grandmother. She always said the secret ingredient in any recipe was love. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Then everything you make must be extraordinary. Everything we make, she corrected. Together. Together, he agreed. And in that word lay all their tomorrows, seasoned with hope and served with joy, one day at a time. Spring arrived on the Nebraska prairie with a burst of wildflowers and warming winds that carried the promise of new beginnings. The Triple C Ranch had weathered its storms, both literal and figurative, and emerged stronger. The trials were behind them. Carnegie and Vanderbilt were serving prison sentences, while Victoria Woodhull awaited her fate in custody. Justice had been served. But more importantly, life had moved forward. Clara stood in the garden she'd expanded over the winter months, her hands deep in the rich soil as she planted herbs alongside the vegetables. The morning sun caught the simple gold band on her finger, now accompanied by a delicate sapphire ring Jameson had surprised her with on their first real anniversary, counting from when they'd truly become husband and wife, not just in name, but in heart. You're out here early again. Jameson's voice came from behind her, warm with the affection that had grown between them through shared trials. The oregano needs to get in the ground before the heat comes. She sat back on her heels, smiling up at him. Besides, I couldn't sleep past dawn anyway these days. His expression shifted to concern. Are you feeling all right? Should I fetch Dr. Roosevelt? Clara laughed, reaching for his hand to pull herself up. I'm fine. Jameson? Better than fine. Actually, she took a deep breath, having planned this moment for days. I'm expecting. The words hung in the morning air like suspended dewdrops. Jameson stood frozen, his eyes searching her face as if afraid he'd misheard. Expecting, His voice was barely a whisper. "You mean a baby? Our baby?" She placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "Doctor, Roosevelt confirmed it yesterday when you were out with the herd." The transformation in his face was beautiful to witness, shock melting into joy. Then something deeper, almost reverent. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of spun glass. "A baby," he repeated, wonder coloring the words. "We're going to have a child. Come October, if the doctor's calculations are correct." She pulled back to see his face, her own concerns surfacing. "I know we haven't been married long in the traditional sense, and with everything that's happened." He silenced her with a gentle kiss. "This is perfect. You're perfect. His voice caught. "I never thought I'd have this again. A family, a future filled with more than just maintaining what was." They stood together in the garden, surrounded by new growth and possibility. The ranch hands, long since accustomed to their employer's happiness, worked around them with knowing smiles. The Triple C had become a place of hope again. "We'll need to prepare the nursery," Clara said, already making mental lists. "And hire some help for when I can't manage the kitchen." "Anything you need," Jameson assured her. "We'll hire a dozen helpers if necessary. You're not to overtax yourself." Clara smiled at his protective tone. "I'm pregnant, not made of porcelain. Farm women have been having babies while working since time began." "Not my wife," he said firmly, then softened it with a smile. "Though I know better than to try to keep you from your kitchen entirely." As news of the impending arrival spread through the ranch, the atmosphere grew even more celebratory. Jeff organized the hands to start work on the nursery, converting one of the rooms near the master bedroom. Frankie Roosevelt took it upon himself to begin crafting a cradle, revealing unexpected woodworking skills. The community's response was more complex. At the next church social, Clara noticed the divided reaction, some genuinely happy for them, others still harboring doubts about their unusual beginning. But when Dr. Roosevelt's wife, Eleanor, publicly embraced Clara and began discussing baby preparations, it tilted the social scales decidedly in their favor. "You've brought life back to that house," Eleanor said warmly, her medical husband nodding agreement. "It's about time Joy returned to the Triple C." Even more surprising was the letter that arrived a week later, addressed in an elegant hand Clara didn't recognize. Jameson brought it to her in the kitchen, where she was teaching the newly hired assistant cook, a widow named Mary Lincoln, who'd come west seeking a fresh start. "It's from Margaret's sister in Chicago," he said quietly, having already read it. "She heard about the baby." Clara's hands trembled slightly as she took the letter. Margaret's family had been notably absent since the marriage, their silence speaking volumes about their disapproval. The letter was brief but kind. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Cole, news has reached us of your expected blessing. While our hearts still ache for our dear Margaret, we recognize that life must continue. She would want the Triple C to be filled with children's laughter again. Please accept our congratulations and the enclosed gift for the baby. Perhaps, in time, we might visit and see the ranch thriving once more. With sincere wishes, Susan B. Anthony." Inside the envelope was a delicate christening gown, obviously in family heirloom. "That's unexpected," Clara said softly. "Margaret's family are good people," Jameson explained. Their silence wasn't judgment so much as grief. "This baby," he touched her shoulder gently, "it's healing for everyone." As spring deepened into summer, Clara's condition became more apparent. She modified her work in the kitchen, grateful for Mary Lincoln's capable hands, but refused to become an invalid. She continued cooking the evening meals, finding the familiar rhythms soothing. One evening in late July, as she worked on a special dinner to celebrate the completion of the new barn, she felt the first flutter of movement. She gasped, hand flying to her rounded belly. Clara Jameson was instantly at her side, Having been reviewing accounts at the kitchen table, a new habit he'd developed, preferring her company to his isolated study. The baby moved. She grabbed his hand, placing it where she'd felt the flutter. They waited, breathless. And then there it was again, stronger this time. The wonder on Jameson's face brought tears to her eyes. "Our child," he whispered. "Strong already, like his mother." "Or her mother," Clara corrected with a smile. "Could be a daughter." "Either would be a blessing." He kept his hand on her belly, marveling at each tiny movement. "Though I admit the thought of a daughter terrifies me. What do I know about raising girls?" "The same thing you know about raising boys: love them, guide them, and hope for the best." Clara covered his hand with hers. "We'll learn together." That night's dinner was particularly joyous, with the ranch hands toasting the felt movements with enthusiasm. The Triple C had become more than just a workplace. It was a community, a family bound by shared experiences and common purpose. As summer waned into early autumn, preparations intensified. The nursery was complete, painted in soft yellows that would suit either a son or daughter. Clara had sewn tiny garments during the evening hours, while Jameson read aloud from books, a new tradition they'd established. "I've been thinking about names," Clara said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie gold. "Oh," Jameson's hand rested on her belly, feeling the now frequent movements of their active child. "If it's a boy, I'd like to call him Thomas, after your father, Thomas James Cole." Jameson was quiet for a moment. He'd have been honored. "And if it's a girl?" Clara hesitated, then forged ahead. "I thought perhaps Margaret, Clara, not to replace or forget, but to honor, if that's not too difficult." "It's perfect," Jameson interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. "Margaret would have loved that. She always said the greatest tribute to the dead was new life, carrying forward their memory." As October approached, Clara found her mobility increasingly limited. Dr. Roosevelt made regular visits, pronouncing everything progressing well. The entire ranch seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. On a crisp October morning, as Clara worked in the kitchen despite everyone's protests that she should be resting, the first pain caught her by surprise. She gripped the table edge, breathing through it as her grandmother had taught her French women. She'd said, knew that birth was work like any other, to be faced with determination rather than fear. "Mary," she called to her assistant, keeping her voice calm. "Please fetch Mr. Cole. Tell him it's time." The next hours blurred together Jameson's worried face, Dr. Roosevelt's reassuring presence, Eleanor Roosevelt arriving to assist. Clara focused on the work of bringing life into the world, drawing on the same strength that had carried her through loss and uncertainty. "You're doing beautifully," Eleanor encouraged as afternoon stretched toward evening. "Not much longer now." Jameson never left her side, letting her grip his hand through the pains, whispering encouragement and love. As the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, their child entered the world with a robust cry that brought tears of joy. "A daughter, Dr. Roosevelt announced, placing the baby in Clara's arms. "A perfectly healthy daughter." Margaret Clara Cole had her mother's delicate features and, already apparent, her father's dark hair. She gazed up at her parents with unfocused eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of new souls. "She's beautiful," Jameson breathed, touching his daughter's tiny fist with one finger. "Look what we made. Clara, look what our love created." Clara, exhausted but euphoric, smiled up at him. "Worth everything we went through to get here. Worth everything twice over." He kissed her forehead. Then their daughters. "Welcome to the Triple C, little one. You're already so loved." As word spread, the ranch erupted in celebration. Jeff organized a proper feast for the next day. When Clara felt up to receiving visitors, the bunkhouse rang with songs and toasts to the newest member of their extended family. That night, as Clara dozed with baby Margaret nursing contentedly, Jameson sat beside them, unable to stop watching. In the soft lamplight, his face showed none of the old grief, only wonder and contentment. "What are you thinking?" Clara asked softly. Seeing him awake, "That sometimes life gives you second chances you never dared hope for," he replied. "That a woman with a pot of soup changed everything. That our daughter will grow up in a house full of love and laughter, surrounded by this magnificent land and good people." "And good food," Clara added with a tired smile. "Don't forget the food." He chuckled softly. "Never. Though I suspect this little one will have the entire ranch wrapped around her tiny fingers before she can even hold a spoon." As if in agreement, baby Margaret made a contented sound, settling deeper into sleep. Outside, the autumn wind sang across the prairie, carrying the scent of wood smoke and coming winter. But inside the Triple C ranch house, all was warmth and peace, a family complete, a future secured, a love that had grown from the most unlikely beginning into something beautiful and enduring. The kitchen where it all began sat ready for tomorrow's meals, Clara's cast-iron pot in its place of honor on the stove. Soon enough, she'd be back there, cooking with a baby on her hip, teaching her daughter the recipes passed down from a French grandmother, sharing the secret ingredient that made everything better: love, freely given and gratefully received. 5 years had passed since Clara Edison first arrived at the Triple C Ranch with nothing but a cast-iron pot and desperate hope. Now, as she stood in her flourishing kitchen garden on a perfect spring morning, she could hardly believe the transformation not just of the ranch, but of her entire life. "Mama, look!" 4-year-old Margaret Clara came running through the herbs, her dark curls bouncing, clutching a handful of wildflowers. Behind her toddled 2-year-old Thomas James, determined to keep up with his older sister despite his shorter legs. "Careful, sweetheart," Clara called, one hand resting on her rounded belly where their third child grew. "Don't trample the basil." "Pretty flowers for baby," Margaret announced, presenting her bouquet with a flourish that reminded Clara achingly of Jameson's dramatic gestures. "Thank you, darling. The baby will love them." Clara accepted the slightly crushed flowers with appropriate ceremony. "Now, why don't you and Thomas help Mary in the kitchen? I believe she's making molasses cookies." The children squealed with delight and raced toward the house, where Mary Lincoln waited in the doorway. Her weathered face creased in a fond smile. The older woman had become like family over the years, a grandmother figure to the children and invaluable help to Clara. "Don't let them eat all the dough," Clara called after them. "As if I could stop them," Mary laughed, just like their father Sweet Tooth a mile wide. Clara smiled, turning back to her garden. The morning sun warmed her face as she surveyed what they'd built together. The kitchen garden had expanded into a small farm operation, supplying not just the ranch but also the growing town of Cedar Ridge, her preserves and baked goods, bearing the Triple C brand, were sought after throughout the territory. Surveying your empire. She turned to find Jameson approaching, still dusty from the morning's work with the cattle. Even after all these years, her heart lifted at the sight of him. The grief lines had softened into laugh lines, and his eyes held a warmth that their children brought out daily. "Our empire," she corrected, accepting his embrace despite the dust. "Though I think the mint is staging a rebellion. It's trying to take over the entire herb section." "Sounds like our daughter," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm carrying a future bronc rider," Clara admitted. "This one's more active than the other two combined." Jameson's hand found her belly, feeling the strong movements within. "Another week or two. Doctor, Roosevelt thinks—" "If I last that long, I swear this child is trying to kick its way out early." She leaned into his strength, drawing comfort from his presence. "Did the buyers from Denver arrive?" "This morning. They're impressed with the breeding program. Looks like we'll have contracts for the next 3 years." Pride colored his voice. The horse breeding program, started with the Arabians that had survived the fire, had become one of the ranch's most profitable ventures. Margaret would be proud, Clara said softly. It had taken time, but they could speak of his first wife now without pain. Only gentle remembrance. She would, Jameson agreed. Of all of it, the ranch thriving, the house full of children, you keeping everyone fed and happy. She always said the Triple C needed a heart, and you've given it one. They were interrupted by the thunder of approaching hooves. Jeff, grayer now, but still spry, rode up at a pace that meant news. Boss, Mrs. Cole. He touched his hat. Thought you'd want to know there's a woman at the gate. Says she's traveling alone, looking for work. She's got a young one with her, maybe 3 years old. Clara and Jameson exchanged glances. They'd seen their share of desperate women over the years, seeking the same salvation Clara once had. Bring her to the house, Clara decided. No one gets turned away hungry from the Triple C. As Jeff rode off, Jameson squeezed her shoulder. You sure you're up for this with the baby coming? I had help when I needed it. Clara reminded him. We pass it on. That's how the world gets better. An hour later, Clara sat across from the young woman in her kitchen, watching her devour vegetable soup with the desperation of true hunger. The woman who'd given her name as Florence Nightingale was perhaps 20, with tired eyes and careful movements that spoke of hard times. It's good soup, Florence said softly, her son eating with equal enthusiasm beside her. My grandmother's recipe, Clara replied, remembering another kitchen, another bowl of soup that had changed everything. French women know that good food can heal more than empty stomachs. I can work, Florence said quickly. I'm strong, not afraid of hard labor. My boy needs a safe place, Clara finished gently. A chance to breathe and plan what comes next. Florence's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Yes. Clara looked at the woman so young, so determined despite her circumstances, and saw herself 5 years ago. The wheel of fortune turned, but kindness could make its rotations gentler. Can you cook? Some. I'm better at mending and washing, but I learned quick. Mary, Clara called to her assistant, who'd been pretending not to eavesdrop while playing with the children. Think you could use help with the household duties with the new baby coming. We'll have our hands full. Mary studied Florence with shrewd eyes, then nodded. Could use another pair of hands, especially with laundry. These little ones go through clothes like wildfire. Then it's settled. Clara announced, room and board, fair wages, and your boy can play with our children. We'll start you tomorrow tonight. You rest. Florence's careful composure finally cracked. Thank you. I don't know how to... You don't need to, Jameson said from the doorway, where he'd been quietly observing. The Triple C takes care of its own. Welcome to the family. Later that evening, after Florence and her son were settled in one of the refurbished bunkhouse rooms, Clara and Jameson sat on their porch watching the sunset. Their children played in the yard under Mary's watchful eye, their laughter mixing with the evening songs of meadowlarks. That was well done, Jameson said, taking her hand. It felt like completing a circle, Clara mused. She reminds me so much of myself when I first arrived. Desperate but not broken, proud but willing to work. You've come a long way from that woman with a soup pot. We've come a long way, she corrected. Neither of us would be who we are without the other. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their domain, not just the vast acres of the Triple C, but the lives they'd touched, the family they'd built, the love they'd nurtured from such unlikely beginnings. As if summoned by their contentment, a sharp pain lanced through Clara's middle. She gasped, gripping Jameson's hand. Clara, I think... Another pain, stronger. I think the babies decided not to wait. The next hours passed in a familiar blur of activity. Doctor. Roosevelt arrived with his wife. The children were settled with Mary and an excited Florence, and the ranch prepared for its newest arrival. This time, Clara knew what to expect, facing the pains with experienced determination. As dawn broke over the prairie, casting golden light through the bedroom windows, Samuel Cole entered the world with lusty cries that announced his strong will. "Another son, Doctor," Roosevelt announced, placing the baby in Clara's arms, healthy as can be. Jameson, who'd once again stayed by her side throughout, touched his son's tiny fist with wonder undimmed by repetition. "He's perfect." "Samuel," Clara said softly, "after your brother who died in the war, is that all right?" Jameson's eyes misted. He would have been honored. Sam always said the frontier was where America's future lay. Now his namesake will help build that future. As the household celebrated the safe arrival, Clara dozed with her new son while Jameson kept watch. Through the window, she could see the ranch coming to life, cowboys heading to their work, smoke rising from the bunkhouse, her older children's voices carrying on the morning air. When she woke fully, the room was full of wildflowers. Margaret and Thomas had picked every bloom they could find to welcome their brother. Florence stood in the doorway with a shy smile, holding a beautifully embroidered baby blanket. "I worked on it last night," she explained, "to thank you for the chance." Clara accepted the gift with tears in her eyes. "It's beautiful. You're very talented." "My mother taught me before she—" Florence trailed off, but Clara understood. They all had their befores here at the Triple C. What mattered was the after. As the day progressed, visitors came and went, ranch hands paying respects, townspeople bringing gifts, even a telegram from Margaret's family in Chicago offering congratulations. The Triple C had become a pillar of the community, its story of redemption and second chances inspiring others. That evening, as Clara sat in her rocking chair nursing Samuel, surrounded by her family, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from a desperate widow with only soup to offer, to mistress of one of the most successful ranches in the territory, from a grieving widower locked in the past, to a loving husband and father embracing each new day. "What are you thinking?" Jameson asked, entering with a tray of food he'd learned long ago that new mothers needed nourishment. "About circles and seasons," Clara replied, "about how that scared woman with a pot of soup could never have imagined this." "She had courage," Jameson said, setting the tray down and kissing her forehead. "And excellent soup. The rest followed naturally." "Naturally," Clara laughed softly, careful not to disturb the nursing baby. "You mean through fires and schemes and desperate chances?" "Through love," Jameson corrected. "Everything else was just the path to get us here." Margaret and Thomas burst in then, eager to see their brother again, and the room filled with the cheerful chaos of family. Outside, the prairie wind sang its eternal song, but inside the Triple C ranch house, all was warmth and belonging. The cast-iron pot still sat on the stove. Seasoned now with years of use and countless meals, it had traveled from desperation to prosperity, from loneliness to love. Every soup, stew, and sauce that emerged from it carried the story forward, a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with the simplest offerings. As night settled over the ranch, Clara looked around at her family, Jameson reading to the older children, baby Samuel sleeping peacefully, the sounds of Mary and Florence preparing tomorrow's bread drifting from the kitchen. This was her empire, built not on land or cattle, but on love, courage, and the unshakable belief that every soul deserved a second chance. The Triple C Ranch stood as testament to that belief, a beacon on the prairie that promised shelter to the desperate, work to the willing, and hope to all who arrived at its gates. And in the kitchen where it all began, the pot waited patiently for tomorrow's soup, ready to nourish both body and soul, just as a French grandmother had taught so long ago. For Clara Cole, who had once offered her cooking for shelter, had received so much more in return. She'd found love, purpose, family, and home. And in the end, wasn't that the most perfect recipe of all? The secret ingredient, she knew now with absolute certainty, had never been herbs or technique. It had always been love freely given, gracefully received, and generously shared. And that was a legacy worth passing on. One pot of soup at a time. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Clara and Jameson's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. Where are you listening from today? Please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts about their story and connect with fellow Western romance lovers from around the world. If you enjoyed this tale of love blooming on the harsh frontier, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 for more heartwarming stories from America's pioneering days. And if this story moved you, please hit that like button and give it a hype to help more people discover these tales of courage, love, and second chances in the Old West. Until our next adventure on the prairie, keep believing in the power of love and the magic of new beginnings.